And thanks very much for joining us. And for this next chunk of time, we're very glad to be joined by Danielle Metz, the Chief Information Officer in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. This is actually her second visit with us for a DoD Cloud Exchange. Last time she was with us a couple years ago, she had a totally different job, which was the Deputy DoD CIO for Information Enterprise. Want to start off by talking about what this new job is. First of all, thanks very much for being here, Ms. Metz. Appreciate you taking the time to join us once again. This new role, very different from the one you had with us last time. Talk about the origins of the office that you now hold, because you were really the first office holder in this incarnation. Anyway, where did it come from? What are the objectives of this new organization?
Yeah, well, first off, Jared, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy our conversations. So I think every great story starts with an origin story, and for us within OSD, which is, just for those listeners to know, it's made up of 17 principal staff assistants, and those principal staff assistants report directly to the Deputy and the Secretary of Defense. And for the past probably 15, 20 years, they had independently been operating and figuring out how to do their own IT activities to execute their mission. And in the 2010 timeframe, there was a big push for IT efficiencies. And there was a general agreement amongst the DoD senior leadership to focus on just okay technology. And if you think about 2010, what technology did we really have? We had computers, we might have been still using fax machines, but we weren't really as technology focused and recognizing the importance and the undercurrent that technology enables everything the department does. So they use those IT efficiencies activities to be able to scoop up dollars that would have been used to have a continuous and access and improvement to technology, and put it to what they consider better or more important priorities. And so for 10 to 15 years, we struggled internally just to be able to keep up. And so that's where you start seeing what people refer to as tech debt. And a real dissatisfaction from the user experience. And our current Deputy Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hicks, really values the importance of not only technology, but using technology to ensure that we have an active and productive workforce, and that we can use those tools to be able to recruit and retain the best, and look forward for expanding to our workforce in 2030 and beyond, getting that new generation. And so she asked myself and my team to lead a study to really assess the current landscape of OSD IT. And so it was a 60-day study. We did it in-house. Typically, a lot of these studies are outsourced. You think the national or the Defense Business Board or other type of brand, for instance. But I think it was really important for it to be technologists that have lived in the Department of Defense and have worked in the Department of Defense and have used the technology that has been afforded in the Department of Defense. And the way that we went about doing this is that we were very much focused on the user experience, and we wanted to center it on the people, the customer base that is OSD. So we conducted listening sessions with each and every one of the PSAs to really understand their pain points, what was working well, what was not. And the one question that I asked each and every one of them was this: how to use technology to execute your mission? And the resounding response was, we don't. And that really was a gut punch as a technologist who, in my prior position, as you mentioned, as the Deputy CIO for Information Enterprise, I had delivered massive enterprise capabilities to the entire department. But the folks in the building weren't using them. They didn't know about it. We were not looking internally. We were always forward facing. And so those listening sessions actually revealed a lot and helped us kind of refine where we needed to prioritize not just technology, but the refinement of policies and people. The other thing that we did was I did listening sessions with what I affectionately call the historical figures. So prior IT senior leadership, to be able to ask them, if you could do things differently, how would you do it? And each and every one of them was very insightful and thoughtful in their perspectives of how they would do things differently. So it was an amazing amount of wealth that we were able to do just by engaging with individuals in the organizations. We also did extensive work trying to build artifacts and data to be able to kind of trace the lineage of how we got to where we are. Because a lot of the problems were people didn't really understand how we got here because nothing was written down. There was nothing codified. And so everyone was very emotive. And it's really hard to have conversations when everyone is triggered by anger or a sense that something was taken from them or that they had been marginalized. And so we really wanted to be able to kind of bring the temperature down and really focus on the facts in order to understand and agree upon what the problem statement is in order to build together what the solution sets needed to be. So we did that in quick order too. We also realized the importance and the value of having governance structures to be able, and forums to bring our customer base together so they can see themselves as a community instead of 17 individual entities that had to figure out and fight and figure things out. And then the other thing that we did, and we learned this from the Air Force and their successes with the user experience surveys, is that we conducted our own quick user experience survey to the population of OSD, just to get different data points and understand those feelings. So to be able to piece the surveys with the listening sessions, with the conversations that we had with the historical figures, with the artifacts and the analysis of that, this whole body of work we were able to present in July of 2022 to Secretary Hicks. And we had a number of findings, but we also had a number of associated recommendations. And the biggest recommendation was establishing a CIO for OSD. And the importance of that is when I think of a CIO really is your strategic visionary that is able to understand and drive not only just the technology and the delivery of technology, but the use of technology through refining business processes and then ensuring that your customer base, your workforce, understands the power of the technology that they have in their fingertips. And it is constant, consistent communication so they understand these new technology evolutions. It's also dynamic training, partnering with the different vendors to ensure instead of just having, kind of boring training, that you're really doing what we call Excite Days. So we make sure for those that are in the respective organizations who fancy themselves as technologists, they want to be helpful, they're eager to learn, they're enthusiastic, we get to train them, and then they get to go back to their respective organizations and inspire, help train their fellow colleagues. This was really helpful when we deployed the commercial virtual remote capability during the pandemic. It was a missed opportunity when we were deploying the DoD 365 solution because we were so focused on not missing a beat and having operational failure that we were focused on deploying the technology. We missed the opportunity to do that type of training. And so the data was showing that even though we were able to successfully get DoD 365 without causing harm when we sunsetted the commercial virtual remote, a lot of people weren't using it. And so to me, that is a failure. And so using all those lessons learned, we're actively applying. And that's what a CIO is supposed to do, right? So the experiences that we've had previously, we're able to actively put into practice now. And so for the CIO, for OSD, is really creating that community, that workforce, that strategic vision, North Star, to drive how technology is going to be useful and helpful and enable continuous execution of whatever the mission is for these various PSAs in service to our nation.
There's a lot there I want to unpack, but just to step back towards something you started with, which was those cost-cutting drills that I think a lot of folks remember from the early 2010s.
Yeah.
Strikes me as something that's really important about that is back in that prior structure when you had these 17 relatively small organizations kind of scattered around, there was no real way to know what the impact of those cost cuts were, right? And no real way to know what the right amount of IT spend is across these organizations to deliver a decent user experience. I know you're trying to correct exactly those problems right now, but give us a sense of what that user base actually is when you add all those 17 PSAs and the DOFAs that you're responsible for together, because small organizations, big user base when you add it all together.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's roughly about 16,000 users across what we call the OSD IT enterprise, and that includes civilians, military, and contractors. And that's a sizable piece. And if you think about the mission sets that those PSAs are executing and doing and performing on behalf of the Deputy and the Secretary of Defense, it's incredibly significant. And if you think about, like in our personal lives, how we use technology to do everything, and you juxtaposition that to what we had been doing in the department, particularly in OSD, it is night and day. And so that's why it was really important to understand kind of the baseline of what we mean by common IT. And the way that we define common IT is your network. So your access to your networks, your end user devices, your service desk, help desk support. Those are basic fundamental activities. And then on that, you're able to build upon your ability to do the more exquisite, whether that is moving from physical legacy data centers to a more cloud-enabled environment, to which then you can start building applications more natively in the cloud. You can start doing software applications. Think about what we have for the defense business systems and how stagnant we have been in that. We are not able to get from where we are in our starting line to where a lot of the other enterprises within the department have been, precisely because of the IT efficiencies, how we viewed and discussed and funded technology, and the fact that we didn't have a CIO that was focused on this community and coming up with strategies, advocating for resources, ensuring that implementation was going the way it needed to have, and then having performance metrics to ensure, are we meeting the mark or not, and having a forum to be able to share that with the customer base. All of that seems very basic, but that was missing. And so over the past 18 months, we've endeavored to course correct a lot of those gaps to be able to create a foundation that then we can be able to build upon, so that we can be on par with how the military department or the DAFAs or joint staff have been acting, because they've all had their own CIOs leading those charges.
So a lot of what you've done so far has been things like just moving to more modern technologies like cloud, like Microsoft 365. As far as the underlying tech debt issues that you discovered as you started kicking over all of these rocks, have you been able to start correcting some of those underlying funding issues? I know it's still early days yet, but has the investment started to flow in to correct some of those problems?
I think we are probably 10 yards behind the start line for that. And what I mean by that is, because of the way that we went about for the 10 to 15 years of the IT efficiencies and consolidation drills, nothing was written down. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of movement and money and resources went here, there, everywhere, but nothing was written down. And so everyone, whether it was from the service provider to the customer base, and these are individual customer bases because they weren't really united to view themselves as a collective, had different expectations, different thoughts. And because we didn't have a memorandum of agreement that articulated what the IT common services were going to be delivered by the service provider, consumed by the customers, the price points associated with that, the performance metrics to ensure that both the service provider and the customer understood what was being delivered, what was considered good, what was considered not so good, and how to correct that. All of that needed to be sorted through. And so that's what we've endeavored on in the past 18 months, was just getting that baseline. And once you understand what your inventory is, then you can, and what your pain points are from your user base based on the listening sessions. We continue with those listening sessions because they were so fruitful. Our user experience survey and the establishment of governance forums to create that community, that identity, that exchange of information so that the user can see themselves in identifying what the problem is, to be able to work with the OSD CIO office to create the solution. That is what we've actively been able to do. Once you have that, then you can start going after the things that you've discussed. And so I think that's the next chapter where we're embarking on. I think we have a good baseline. We've been doing the analysis. We've established ourselves and shown our value to the customer base. I think they are excited that they are now empowered with being able to exchange ideas, talk about what's working, what's not, and it's not viewed as complaints, but it is viewed as these are gaps, and this is how we're going to go about to close those gaps. And that's really significant to have your user base excited for the work that you're doing, because it's just a virtual cycle of goodness. It just feeds off of each other. And that's exactly what a really good CIO is able to do for her or his enterprise.
I want to put a pin in that user base for just a second, because I want to talk about what you learned from those surveys. But just to go back to the memorandum of agreement, which I understand is now signed.
It is.
One thing that's not new here is DISA acting as the service provider for all these organizations, right? The joint service provider came into being 10 years or so ago. I think what's new is there's common agreement between all of these organizations, OSD and DISA, about the way forward. Is that the right way to think about it? What changes with the MOA?
Yeah, so I think for the MOA itself, the biggest piece is there has been a reorganization within DISA. So JSP had been somewhat quasi-independent and focused on the Pentagon. So they had their own service offerings that were, exclusive to the users at the Pentagon. And at the Pentagon, we have three main customer bases. So we have OSD, which before we came wasn't really considered a community. So it was just, the 17 plus the 6 staffers. You have Joint Staff, which was performing and acting as an enterprise. And then you have Department Headquarters Army. Those are the three onboarded customer base that receives all their services from the joint service provider. And that's also when, during the IT efficiencies, each one of those organizations that I listed had their own individual service provider, and so we were able to kind of smash them together, in effect. And then DISA itself is the service provider at the enterprise level, and so they've been doing a lot of good work in terms of what they're doing for the DAFAs, trying to bring all the DAFAs together with DoD Net, DISA serving as the enterprise service provider. With the reorganization that took place this past summer, JSP is now fully inculcated into DISA. So DISA truly is the service provider, and all services that DISA has in their catalog is now being provided and consumed by the Pentagon, just as if it is with the DAFAs, the military services, et cetera. As it relates to the MOA specifically, the way that we did this is that it's the first time articulating, codifying roles and responsibilities of the service provider, of the OSD IT enterprise customer base, and then my office, the OSD CIO. OSD was represented by my boss, Jennifer Walsh, who's the Performance Improvement Officer and the Director of Administration Management. And so she serves for the DSD as kind of like the COO, if you will. So for the operational activities for the DSD, and her role as the component head for OSD. And then General Skinner, who's the DISA director, he represents DISA, all of DISA, right? And then specifically what they provide for the service provider. It also baselines the common IT services and provides performance metrics. None of that existed before we put this into place. And it was a 13-month engagement to ensure that all of the stakeholders saw themselves into this MOA and had agreement. So it was quite a slog, but absolutely worth it, and was signed out last week. And just incredible work by all the teams, and of course by mine too, because without it, we were the catalyst to kind of get this going. But it serves as what I'll call the floor. So now we're able to build upon that. And so now that we understand common IT, now we can set our sights on figuring out the next iteration of the MOA, which would include more future type things, like for when OSD starts actively doing cloud migrations and hosting things in the cloud, our authorizing official, because right now OSD does not have one. It's being performed by a variety of different AOs, and before our office was established, each one of the OSD PSAs had to figure out who their AO was going to be. And that's really challenging if, based on all of the consolidation efforts that took place, if we took away all the technical acumen from these PSAs, how are they making those types of decisions? And if no one's helping them do that, and they didn't have a community to kind of share lessons learned, that means you're having the same failure across each and every one of those PSAs. And that's what our office is endeavoring to try to correct, close that gap. And so that's what we're going to partner and work with over the next iteration of the MOA.
And all of that better coordination that comes about through that MOA, does that do anything in particular for you in terms of presenting a single face to industry or better consolidated buying power when you put all these things together? How do you think about that?
Absolutely, because now we're acting as an enterprise instead of individual fiefdoms. And it works two ways. One, that we have the collective buying power, as you mentioned, but we also are able to advocate for the resources that we need in the resourcing cycle. In order to ensure that we all get what is needed and not piece parts, or whomever is able to really navigate the PBBE process, which was happening. So if you take a step back, and this is what our study also showcased as part of like the assessment of the OSD IT landscape, was obviously in the status quo that we've described, there are winners. There are not very many winners, but there are some winners, and there are a lot of people that are struggling. A lot of organizations that are struggling. And the whole point of what a CIO brings to bear is that you want to be able to democratize access and the ability to have what those who are doing really well in, you want to be able to spread that out so that everyone's able to have access to that, and that we don't have winners and losers, and that there's more commonality in being together. And then if you're able to get that baseline, then you could build upon the exquisite, as opposed to focusing on what makes us unique and different. Because that doesn't work, because you spend all your time arguing over who's more special instead of getting to the work at hand, which is we have a lot of things in common, and a lot of the common IT, like your network, like your service desk, your end user devices, being able to have a consistent technology refresh on a cycle that is 3 to 4 years as opposed to 6 to 10. All of that drives the ability for your user experience to improve. And you're able to kind of test drive that hypothesis by the forms that we establish with our governance structure, with the user experience, the accountability, and the transparency. You're also able to measure that through the user experience surveys that we have, and then the listening sessions that we do. And all of that, that's where you're able to kind of adjust the levers accordingly to make sure, am I on the right track? Is my strategy the correct way to go about it? And if not, how do I adjust my implementation? How do I adjust the resourcing, the prioritization of those resources to go after really what the user needs and what you're hearing from the user? And so that's the environment that we've created as part of the OSD IT enterprise. And then I think in the next 18 months, it's just building upon off that.
And one thing that we've talked about before is at least an eventual objective is to be able to present a single unified IT budget at some point to
That's my
OSD,
dream.
to OMB.
Yes.
Sounds like you're not there yet.
We are not there yet, but I can see it in the distance. I mean, that's definitely where we want to be able to go. And I think just being able to have a lot of these fundamental building blocks in place now that we worked on for the past 18 months is absolutely instrumental in for us to be able to get to that next step. The other thing that we're able to do, like with that memorandum of agreement and having people both from the service provider and the customer base, and of course my office, understand what is being delivered, what is being consumed, and the price points associated that with the performance metrics, is now that we can start having conversations in terms of what is the right funding model for the service provider. And then the transition from what it currently is right now, which is an appropriated funding model, to a fee for service or a defense working capital fund. And so those are the activities that we are now underway. And it is everything that we do, and I think anything that anyone does in the CIO space, it is all about collaboration. It's all about partnerships. It's all about understanding and ensuring that your workforce, your customer base, understands what's going on, is confident in what you're doing. They see themselves in whatever the solution sets are, so that you always have their buy-in. All that takes time, and it's time worth spent if you're able to do it correctly. And so that's what we're going to be working on for the next 18 months. And that's also in partnership with the service provider as well. DISA has a significant role in this because, as a service provider, they want to do well. They want to be able, this is their job. They want to be able to excel. And right now, I think that the appropriated funding model just is not the right approach to ensure that we have consistent and continuous access to current technology. Right now, what are we in? We're in a continuous resolution, have been for quite a while. That's really hard to be able to do planning for new technology insertions, to be able to address tech debt, and to be able to have like a consistent funding profile to go after those things. In a working capital fund, you wouldn't have that issue. And so those are types of real value propositions that we need to bring to bear. But we also need to make sure that everyone, from the customer and the service provider, is witting of what the current costs are and the services that are being consumed, and then how that would transition and move forward in a working capital fund.
Just to spend one more beat on the funding model, I think it's really important, and I'm sort of obsessed with PPBE and all the associated challenges. It's not one weird trick to solve all of those problems, but it does solve a lot of them, right? You worry a lot less, if at all, about colors of money. You do not really worry that much about a 5-year POM build. Yeah. The money is just kind of continuously refreshed, and you can use it as needs arise. Is that about right?
That is exactly right. I think right now, and for those who haven't really done a PBB process, and I've done way too many, is that as a technologist, you're 2 years out for a 5-year plan. So you're using your crystal ball to kind of assess, what is the technology that we need to be able to implement? And then you have to get a lot of details to be able to come up with the funding profile over 5 years. But you're doing it 2 years out.
Right.
You're going to be wrong. Yep. And even if you have it programmed, if you're in a CR, you don't have access to those dollars. And it really slows your ability to drive the important changes that need to take place. In a working capital fund or a fee for service, you're able to have the capital investments that you can do those insertions a lot more gracefully, instead of having to do big bang approaches, which we know in technology never ever works. And I think the other thing that the working capital fund affords is a more candid and robust conversation between the customer and the service provider, because now you know what you're consuming, and you can see, I have a lot of legacy that I'm consuming, which is the same stuff that I'm paying for the new enterprise capabilities that you have. I don't want this legacy anymore. I want us to be off that, and so that we're on to the enterprise. So it's a forcing function. It helps incentivizes to make sure that we're all using, the common enterprise capabilities that you can build upon, like DoD 365 and all the offerings that DoD 365 have. For instance, OneDrive. Right now, we have a lot of legacy where you have H drive, O drive, et cetera. You don't need to have that physical, server bases. You could be using the cloud. We've been in DoD 365 for 2 years. We're not maximizing the technology. Having a working capital fund model, understanding the capabilities that are at your fingertips, making sure that your customer base is informed of that, and then they can understand what they're paying for, and the service provider is able to also be informed and understand that as well, then you can have a better conversation. It's masked in an appropriated funding model.
As we start to wind down on time, I definitely want to make sure we talk about some of the accomplishments that you've had in this short 18 months so far. One of them has been, just the huge migration of this entire user base to Office 365, including mostly done on the secret side too now, right? Which is a very big deal for any DoD component. What's that done for the organization?
Well, so yeah, that has been quite significant. So for DoD 365, we were able to do that for our unclassified, or what we call NIPRNet. And so that has been completed for quite some time. Then we were able to transition to IL6, our CIPRNet, and so we call DoD 365 IL6. So in the fall, this past fall, we had plans in place to be able to do the implementation, and with an ambitious goal to have at least our user base completely on IL6 in the December timeframe. Well, life happens, reality happens, there's a lot of things, but we were still able to press forward. So we were able, my office was one of the early adopters, as well as quite a few that we were able to partner with, who saw the importance and the value of having DoD 365 on IL6. Because if you take a step back, part of the issues are our current legacy collaboration on IL6 or on CIPR is fairly disjointed and antiquated. But that's where we do a lot of our work. And so we wanted to be able to enjoy all of the modernization that we have on our unclassified and have that on parity with what we did for IL6. So we only have one organization within our OSD IT enterprise family that has not migrated, but they are on track to be able to migrate in the next week or so. For those that are on it, it's been joyful. We were able to have access to Microsoft Teams. Soon we will be able to start having access to OneDrive and all the other capabilities associated with DoD 365. The thing that I really like about it is it's the exact feel that you have on DoD 365 on our unclassified. So it makes it easier for the user to have like that same experience. I feel like the more that you're able to standardize experiences, regardless of what network you're on or where you work from home, whether you work from home or if you're physically in office, you want to have that same standard experience so that you can just do your job. You don't have to worry about, am I going to figure out how to do this? This looks different. I don't know. Because you don't want people to be nervous or frustrated with their technology. You want them to be able to use it to execute their mission. And so I think that's the really nice thing about the DoD 365 IL6. Plus, we're all on the same network. We're all in the same collaborative cloud. And so we're finally able to collaborate together. So it's really harmonizing the experience of being in an enterprise and being a community.
Yeah, on the high side especially, that I think that's especially important because there were a lot of different pretty aging tools that people were using to collaborate at the secret level. Now that everybody's in one sort of cloud environment, I guess I wonder, does that paper over the network fragmentation issues that you still have, or does it make them irrelevant? I mean,
it doesn't make them irrelevant, but it helps us be able to prioritize the fact that we do need to do some network simplification, both on our unclassified and classified. And that's one of the efforts that DISA is leading with what they call DoDNet. And so it is again, I'll say simplification of having essentially one unclassified network, one classified network, primarily for the DAFIS, and so that's where they've been working on for the past few years, but we are working with DISA to accelerate their plans to have that in the Pentagon. And so therefore, you don't have like a Pentagon local area network that's kind of sandwiched in between all these other different various networks, whether it's classified, unclassified. We really do need to streamline and simplify the network because we have a lot of network outages. We have performance issues. And that is, we hear that a lot from our user community, the fact that they want to have a consistent and reliable network connection. And right now, because of the way we've overcomplicated our networks, we don't have that. And the fact that we are now in a more cloud-based capability delivery and consumption model, you have to have a simple network that is always going and reliable. And so now we can kind of turn our sights on to ensure that we have that.
Perfect transition to what you've learned from these user surveys that you've been doing, because I think you're right now at the point where you've got a full year of good data. Talk a bit about what you've learned now that you have the capability to do something like that.
Yeah, I think, again, hats off to the Air Force. We partnered with them early on to be able to ensure that we were following what they did, because they were probably 2 to 3 years ahead of just about all the other enterprises when it came to user experience. So the way that we did this is that we used DoD 365 forms. It was 3 simple questions, yes, no, drop down, and then we had a 4th one that was a free form. And that's where you get a lot of your really good information. We realized early on that some of the questions that we asked out of the 3 weren't precise enough, and the Air Force cautioned us of that. They're like, you're gonna see that what you thought was a good question to solicit the right answer, not so much. But we didn't want to adjust in midstream, so we were able to get our full year of data. And the other thing that we did for OSD, our population is pretty diverse. So we have about 6,800 GS-15, so that's our civilians and below, and then our colonels, 06s and below. So they're in that shot put of this 6,800. Then we also have our executive tier, so think general officer, flag officer, and senior executives. That's about 300. And the reason why we divided it up is because for the senior executives in the Pentagon, they get different services. They have a different service desk. And so we wanted to be able to level set current baseline activities so that we would have that foundation as we move to the next year and we start doing insertions into, like, for the global service desk, et cetera. So from what I call the general population, the GS-15s and the colonels and below, was dissatisfaction, a frustration across the board from a user experience. lack of communication, lack of responsiveness. So this is really targeted to the service desk. Network performance issues. Those were kind of the highlights on that you were able to see really resonating. As it relates to the executive service, the executive population, really pleased with their VIP service desk, right? So going back to the fact that we really want to be able to democratize access, that's what we're are going to position in the global service desk. But the other thing that the executives identified was network issues, end user devices, so the lifecycle replacement idea, and then video conferencing. So whether if you're in the building or if you're coming in remote, there's a lot of issues, and that's related to both end user devices as well as the network. And so we were able to take that and complement it with the listening sessions so that we were able to see a lot of these common themes for that as well. And the body of work that we are doing now is that we have drafted an OSD IT digital roadmap for FY 26 to 30. Previously, we had an implementation plan that was submitted last year to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, where we articulated 3 goals. Those 3 goals are still germane, and they're part of that roadmap. But what we really wanted to do was ensure that we were better storytellers of the importance and relevance of technology. So we didn't want to focus just on technology. We wanted to focus on how technology drives business outcomes. And we have 5 desired business outcomes that the digital roadmap is going to go after. And, you know, just to list some of them is ensuring that we have reliable remote experience. It's ensuring that we have a consistent network performance, continuous access to current technology. It's to ensure that we have a reliable service desk. And the last one is to protect DoD data. All of those themes were bore out from the user experience surveys that we just completed our first year, the listening sessions, the governance structures that we have stood up. And so it goes back to that point of ensuring that your users, your customer base, are a part of crystallizing what the problem set is, so they can actively be a part and empowered to come up with the solution set. And that's what I believe our digital roadmap is showcasing. So we're really excited to be able to start rolling that out in the next month or so.
In those surveys, are you able to tell how much an issue return to work is? Because fairly easy to access the cloud from your home. When everybody's doing it on government networks at the same time, all of a sudden, that's some pressure on the network, right?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it's interesting that you say that. So if you think about where we were a year ago, probably in the January, February, March timeframe, it was showing that there was a lot more people that were working remote vice working in the building. Last summer, you saw a transition where it was more people coming into the office. So you can see the trend is changing over time. But regardless of that, the key points are still relevant in terms of having network simplification, access to continuous current technology, which is making sure that you're on a 3-year or 4-year lifecycle replacement for your end user devices. So those are the things that we really need to prioritize and focus on. And I think the user experience surveys kind of help us kind of look through the weeds to find the ones that are the right building blocks to go after, and then collectively advocate for those resources for implementation. And the way that we kind of go about doing this is that we've created, based on the experiences that we've had for a number of years in our previous positions within the CIO community, is to create a repeatable framework that we call the business of doing. And really that is just like this iterative cycle of focusing on having your governance forum, which we touched upon, the importance of bringing together your user base, your service provider, to have that accountability, the feedback and representation of the user themselves, and to be able to identify what your priorities are, what are your requirements, be able to rack and stack that, come to agreement. And then you go into that slog of the PBBE and the resourcing cycle to make sure, as a community for OSD, our office represents the OSD's priorities that we agreed upon. to be able to get access to those dollars. And then the next piece is the implementation, which DISA is our implementer. So they are implementing what we need based on what we agree to. And then the last piece is the performance metrics. How well are we doing? Were we right in our hypotheses and thinking that, doing this type of network simplification or the new modernization tools for the global service desk, is that right? Is it not? Where do we need to adjust? And you do those adjustments in the governance cycle, and then that's your virtual cycle of goodness that we have. And so we were able to establish that. We were able to refine it when we went after the global service desk. We were able to accelerate DISA's plans by 2 years to have the global service desk, the modernization tools of the help desk within the Pentagon by 2 years. And so that was just implemented this past January. And so, again, that came from what we were hearing from the users. There is a lot of angst with the previous service desk. Now, for those like myself who enjoy the VIP service desk, we knew how well that is, but we wanted to make sure that everyone was having that experience. And so that's what we're endeavoring to do. And so that's what the new tools are going to do with the new business processes and the training. So it's really that holistic approach of technology, people, and process.
And that cutover to the new service desk happened sort of midway through this service period. Are you able to tell, or do you have any other evidence that that's gotten the rest of this user base closer to that VIP level of service?
Not yet, because when you do something new and you've been used to something old, what happens? Change hurts, right? So because even though you hated what you had, you've gotten used to it and you were able to work around it. So when you offer something new, it's a huge learning curve. And so that's where the communication, the governance structure, the ability to help iterate and showcase what this new technology is able to do is so very important. So we had fits and starts. It wasn't seamless by any stretch of the imagination. But if history shows us, because DISA has deployed this to a number of DAFAs, once you get over that initial shock of change and people start using it and becoming more experienced and they're practicing with it, it is more valued, and you can see the goodness of that. We just launched last month our new user surveys. One of those questions is the global service desk, and so we'll be able to gain a year's worth of insight. February of is it going to be 2025? Yeah, 2025. And we can, again, see how well we're doing. But all the while, we have performance metrics that are enshrined in that memorandum of agreement. We have those same performance metrics are what we track in our governance structure that the service provider reports out. So we don't have to wait the whole year to figure out, are we doing right? We're able to track this on a regular cadence and make it the necessary adjustments.
Now that you've got some of the common IT figured out and you start to look ahead toward providing more mission IT, that authorizing official issue that you brought up earlier is going to be really important, right, as folks start to move some of this mission IT to the cloud. Any idea what that looks like in terms of who folks might be able to look to be their AO?
Right, so I think right now Danny Holtzman in the CDAO has been piloting efforts of authorizing official as a service. And he has a wealth of experience when he was at the Air Force, so he's taking what he did there, building it for OSD. And so Danny and I are partnered to work through what that would look like, and that could be a service offering that the OSD IT enterprise can take advantage of. Right now, the way that we have that, because my office is just too small to be able to take on that role. In time, we will be able to do that with our partnership with Danny. But I think there's a lot of promise in the piloting that he has been doing. And that is going to be critical for as we put out our corporate playbooks for cloud migration, kind of standardizing some of the technology and the business processes that we've learned over the years of doing cloud migrations. Having an AO that would be able to service all of OSD. Then we can start doing, to your point, the exquisite, which is those defense business systems, and we're putting them on the right tracks to be able to modernize. We've talked a lot about it. It's been really challenging specific to OSD because of the number of issues and gaps and challenges that we've either self-inflicted upon ourselves over the many years of doing IT efficiencies, or the fact that we just didn't have a CIO that was paying attention and coming up with a strategy with the customer base to move forward.
A lot more we could talk about, but I am afraid we're going to have to leave it there for time. Ms. Metz, thanks so much for coming back and joining us for
Thank
the DoD
you.
Cloud
I enjoyed
Exchange.
it.
You bet. And I'm Deputy Editor Jared Serbu, and you're watching Federal News Network. I'll send you back to the studio now for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.